Order. Mr. Desi to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Latham, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I beg to move that this House has considered personal independence payments and other disability benefits. I'm very grateful, Ms. Latham, to the House authorities, in particular for allowing me to secure this important debate, because it is an issue of huge concern to many across our country, including in my Slough constituency, where often constituents have come to me to meet me at my advice surgeries with tears streaming down their eyes in absolute despair at the predicament that they are facing, especially as they are struggling to make ends meet in the midst of a cost of living crisis. This evening I stand before this House to draw attention to the state of disability benefits in our nation, those in our society with disabilities and other health conditions which often prevent them from working are valuable members of our society. They cannot be summarised by statistics nor by how much they cost the public purse. Behind every figure, Mrs. Latham, is a disabled person. Successive Conservative governments have again and again undermined social security in our country, whether it be through cutting support, a punitive culture towards disabled applicants, or perhaps most disappointingly, divisive rhetoric about the most vulnerable in our society from none other than senior government ministers. It is my belief, Mrs. Latham, that how the most vulnerable are treated is a benchmark of how healthy our society is. I'm proud to say that under a Labour government, every stage of the social security system will be supportive and accessible. Labour understands the importance of every person with disabilities being treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve. Unfortunately, this isn't a view which is shared by everyone in our society. Under the Conservatives, many disabled people feel that the DWP is failing them with an assessment process which does not understand their needs. My Slough constituent, Monica, yes, I will give way.
He's making a powerful speech about a very important subject. In fact, Eleanor, one of my constituents, got in touch with me recently. She had a young child and was pregnant and reassessed. Her money was dropped. She found out just before she had her second child. And then the money was reinstated at appeal. Does he agree with me that the assessment process is mad at the moment? It's crazy, it's not sensible, and we need to change it, and fast?
I thank my honourable friend for making the case for Eleanor in her constituency. Indeed, she is a strong champion of her constituents, and no doubt she, along with other right honourable members of this place, will have helped constituents regain thousands of pounds worth of support that they are duly due. I do agree with her that the assessment process is something that does need to be looked at, and I hope that the Minister will give us some good news at the end of this debate. Yes, I will give way to my honourable friend.
And also, I congratulate him on gaining this speech. We've had some tragic cases in recent years, unfortunately, including people who have gone through the transition from DLA to PIP. And one person in particular sticks in my mind, Philippa Day, who died. She took her own life because of the transition process and how appalling that was and the mistakes that were made there. We need to make sure that we have policies and systems in place for our health assessments and elsewhere that protect vulnerable people, that don't actually make it worse. I'm sure he agrees with that.
I thank my honourable friend, and indeed she speaks with a great deal of experience, having served previously as a Shadow Secretary of State, and indeed the word there is tragedy. There have been countless tragedies, and that is why the likes of myself have been calling upon the government to deal with issues with compassion, with empathy, because these are real people that we are talking about, and often they have, unfortunately, lost their lives, or they have been put in a state of such despair that they do not know how to get out of their predicament. Indeed, my Slough constituent, Monica, told me about her struggles being assessed for PIP. Monica was informed, Mrs. Latham, that she was required to have a health assessment in relation to extending her PIP. After appealing against 27 pages of discrepancies and outright untruths in the report from her previous assessment, she was predictably very worried about how she would get through things and about going through this again. Her assessment ended up being delayed for a month and taking place when she was suffering particularly ill health. Monica was again left in the lurch by the DWP and left facing another appeal, which she is now dreading. Stories like Monica's, unfortunately, aren't news to any of us, as my honourable friends have already eloquently explained. We all have constituents who are failed by the system and the DWP. Labour has a plan, Mrs. Latham, to replace the government's current flawed system of work capability assessments with a system that can support people to live with security. Many benefit claimants are aspirational, but also fearful that if they go back into work and they find themselves unable to cope, that they will be left high and dry, assessed as being able to work, but finding themselves unable to work full-time. Labour's plan was born out of a desire to deliver for disabled people, helping those who can work back into work. Too many disabled people, Ms. Latham, say the current system doesn't work for them. Labour has pledged that it will introduce the Into Work Guarantee, which I hope the Shadow Minister will explain at length, because that, I feel, allows claimants to agree with their benefits advisor that if they try paid work and it doesn't work out, within a period of a year that they can go back to the exact benefits that they were on without fresh health assessments. With 288,000 PIP claims outstanding, Mrs. Latham, in October 2023, does the Minister agree that Labour's plan will help to reduce the number of disabled people who want to work but don't want to risk having their benefits reassessed? In January, Mrs. Latham, of this year, the latest statistics from the House of Commons Library found that the most common main disabling condition amongst claimants of PIP were psychiatric disorders. Nationwide, 37.7% of PIP claims were due to this, with mental health waiting lists ballooning under the Conservatives. This is unfortunately not a surprising statistic. When the government leaves suffering people far too long, people who often see their condition worsen before being able to access treatment, it's no wonder this number is so unacceptably high. I believe that this begs the question, will the Minister admit that her party's policies on mental health over the past 14 years have significantly contributed to the PIP backlog? The latest numbers from Macmillan Cancer Support, Mrs. Latham, found that claimants are still waiting 15 weeks on average for their PIP claim to be processed. Unacceptably, this is higher than it was at the same time last year, with 4 in 5 people living with cancer facing an increased financial impact from their diagnosis, even before the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. It is now unacceptable that the government has failed to fix these issues, which affect our constituents at some of the most difficult periods in their lives. The government announced extra funding for processing disability claims in the budget. But can the Minister clarify how exactly this will be used to reduce delays? Now, Mrs. Latham, among PIP claimants in my Slough constituency, 16.3% of them are due to musculoskeletal disorders. The MS Society's research found it evident that our current disability assessment system is not fit for purpose for those living with multiple sclerosis, a condition that significantly varies in its impact from day to day. A staggering 3 in 5 people with MS have reported being unable to adequately explain the effects of their condition on the standard application form. This highlights a systemic failure to capture the true extent of disabilities that are not constant but fluctuate, underscoring this government's failure to create a nuanced system which understands the lived realities of those with MS and other conditions. Furthermore, the MS Society's findings urge the government to consider the elimination of the 20-metre rule used in mobility assessments and to seek a more flexible approach that accurately reflects the variable nature of MS. Current criteria fail to accommodate the day-to-day changes in symptoms that people with MS experience. On one day, walking 20 metres is achievable. On others, it is downright impossible. This clearly leads, Mrs. Latham, to assessments that do not reflect disabled people's actual needs. Incorporating these changes into our approach to disability benefits would not only make the system fairer, but also ensure that individuals with MS and similar fluctuating conditions receive the support that they truly need. I'm proud that Labour is committed to delivering a system which works for disabled people, ensuring that every person with a disability receives the respect, support and dignity that they deserve. In conclusion, Mrs. Latham, I would like to thank the various constituents who have come to me and who have asked me to share their stories. I'm grateful also to the various voluntary organisations who make such an enormous impact to help those in dire need. And as we conclude this debate on personal independence payments and other disability benefits, let us remember the very essence of what we're discussing today, the lives and well-being of some of the most vulnerable members of our society. The accounts we've heard serve as a stark reminder of the critical work that lies ahead. It is evident that our current system, in its rigidity and lack of understanding, falls short of providing the necessary support to those living with conditions like MS. The call to reform to dismantle barriers such as the 20-metre rule and to embrace a more nuanced approach to disability assessment is more than just policy revision. It's a moral imperative. We stand, Mrs. Latham, at a crossroads when the choices we make can significantly enhance the lives of thousands. By advocating for a system that truly understands the variable and complex nature of disabilities, we advocate for a society that places dignity, empathy, and support at its very heart. This is not just about adjusting guidelines or streamlining processes. It's about ensuring that every individual feels seen, heard, and valued. Our commitment to reforming PIP and other disability benefits is a testament to our dedication to justice and equity for all citizens, regardless of their physical or mental health challenges. Let us leave this chamber, Mrs. Latham, with a renewed dedication to serve those within our constituency and beyond, ready to enact the changes necessary for a fairer, more compassionate benefits system. Together, we have the power to transform lives. Let that be our guiding principle in the days ahead. Thank you very much.
They want to be called in this debate. The question is that this House has considered personal independence payment and other disability benefits. John McDonnell.
I'll try and be brief as possible so others can come in. I just want to make one specific point before I come on to the general point to reinforce what my honourable friend has said. On this specific point, I'm a champion for Action for ME, the myalgic encephalomyelitis campaign. They've written to a number of us, I believe, who've emphasised the concerns that they've got with regard to the PIP assessments and how narrow it is, and as a result of that, sufferers on ME lose the ability to access the relevant benefits themselves. They're simply asking for the minister to commit to what the previous minister was, which was to meet with them so that they can work and co-produce a system to enable them to have full access. I dealt with the first ME case about 25 years ago, and it was then when it was refused to be recognised. There was a lot of stigma attached to it. These people have been sufferers in the quiet now, and I think it does behove the government now to sit down with this group and work through the process from here on in. I want to take up where my honourable friend has left off with regard to the impact that this system has on individuals at the moment. Some who were at the Select Committee may recall the evidence that was provided with regard to Michael O'Harlan. Michael O'Harlan was a case I dealt with 10 years ago. I met his family, the lovely Anne-Marie and Declan. He was a person who had suffered mental health difficulties, had attempted suicide already, then was assessed, declared fit for work and couldn't cope with it, and then committed suicide. That was 10 years ago. John Pring, some of you will know from the Disability News Service, does an excellent role in monitoring cases and providing information to many of us. He's been monitoring recent cases, particularly in relation to people coming under pressure with regard to universal credit and seeking to apply. And it just gave 3 examples in this last couple of years, really. I'll just give you brief details on them. I won't use any names. A disabled woman left traumatised by daily demands of universal credit took her own life. Days earlier, she'd been told she would need to attend a face-to-face meeting with a work coach. She'd shake and cry every time she had to log onto a universal credit journal, which she had to do every weekday to check whether she'd received instructions and avoided a sanction. She'd already had a 6-month sick note from her doctor explaining she was not fit to work, but she was expected to go through the whole process itself, and she couldn't cope with it. The DWP were told about her mental distress. They were told about her suicidal thoughts and the fear of the department. She took her own life. There was another suicide just months after that. Someone who had a long history of depression and anxiety had been engaging with mental health services. He'd been detained under the Mental Health Act. He was then discharged. A psychiatrist saw him on 2 days before he took his own life, and he told the inquest that psychiatrist said he believed the anxiety had been exacerbated by the whole process of the universal credit applications itself. Another one, 2023, died a month after taking an overdose that caused irreversible damage to her liver. The coroner didn't believe she intended to take her own life, but nevertheless the coroner wrote a prevention of harm report to the DWP, highlighting how the DWP itself had failed in its duty to maintain protection. The reason I raise these is because John Pring and others had to go to a Freedom of Information access point. He took a Freedom of Information Act to get a report that was produced by the Prime Minister's Information Unit on the very issue of the harm caused by this process and the suicides that were taking place. It was 4 years before that report was produced. It had been covered up within the PMIU and prevented from publication itself. That report, actually, a number of us had been calling for on the floor of the House of Commons and been denied access to it. And the reason we were calling for it, because in the report there were certain recommendations being made about the duty of care that the department had to these particular people when they were identified as vulnerable, and certain specific actions were needed to be put in place. I believe there's a further reports that, again, I believe should be produced, and there should be full openness and transparency on all of this. I commend DPAC, Disabled People Against the Cuts, have been running a campaign year in, year out about this issue, basically saying when it comes to disability benefits for PIP, the work capability assessment, the application process on the universal credit, the pressures that people are put under, it's putting lives at risk. And what Anne-Marie called for, which I think is right now, we need a statutory duty of care placed upon the department with regard to vulnerable people in particular. And actually, on the level of harm that's been done by the department, I do believe now also, I agree with Anne-Marie and others, that there should be an independent public inquiry into the harm that's been created, certainly over the last 14 years, by the brutal way in which benefits have been administered, particularly those who are particularly vulnerable with mental health problems.
Have to reduce the time to no more than 5 minutes each speech. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for Slough for his persistent and thorough questioning of DWP on matters pertaining to disability benefits. I support him in debates in this hall and in the chamber as well. And he's been I use the word, it's often used, but it's good to have at this side of the chamber a champion, and his work has been excellent. There will not be one of us engaged member of this House who does not have an awful story of someone turned down for help when they're so much in need of it. I have a constituent now, I'm not going to mention his name, I'm just going to tell a story, who currently is a plasterer. He's 50 years of age. He had many years of work ahead of him, and as someone who's good at his job, he is never out of work because he's always done a good job all his life. This was his plan. However, the reality that he's had a number of strokes, been in the intensive care unit, has been told he will never regain strength enough to work and will struggle with daily life. His wife is a care assistant in a special needs school, and she's been able to help him in many ways he never dreamed of, that he would ever need that sort of help. And yet he has been turned down for PIP's, personal independence payment. For the life of me, Madam Chair, I cannot understand how someone who needs help for daily care by his wife, his mother-in-law and daughter has been given no points in that assessment. The system has clearly let him down. And I can see the difference because I know the guy. I knew him all my life, or all his life, I should say. Now, my staff will, of course, assist him in his appeal. But I always thought, Madam Chair, that the idea of the benefit system is to help those in need. Now, the Honourable Gentleman who spoke before me, Hayden Harrington, referred to the people who need help. And it really depresses me when you look at this. Indeed, the recent Supreme Court judgment has shown that assessments have not been carried out in the correct way, meaning that 250,000 cases are to be reopened, to ascertain if the correct assessment criteria was used. And speaking as someone, and I do this, it's not a boast, Madam Chair, I fill in forms regularly for people in benefits, and I know the system fairly well. I have a staff member who does nothing else but look after benefit queries, so we're in the front line when it comes to that. She's incredibly overworked. It is clear to me that the criteria has never followed the spirit of the law. The spirit is to ensure that those who need help with their daily lives can get that help. The reality has been incredibly ill people being made to feel like liars or spongers or fakers, made to feel that they have no right to help and that the world judges them. From cancer patients of grown men, examples again, who require their wife to now catheterise them multiple times during the day, to those who are severely impacted by lifelong learning difficulties, been forced to have their awards renewed and their routines disrupted with assessments. This system lets people down regularly, and it needs to be changed. It needs to understand with compassion the issues for my constituents and other constituents who have spoken and who will speak after. Yes, we need to ensure that those claiming are entitled to the system. I understand that. But the way this is assessed needs to change, and change now. So, Minister, we say this beseechingly, we say it with honesty, and we do it because we do it on behalf of my constituents and on behalf of others as well, to ascertain how quickly these changes can be made so that men like my constituent, who feels worthless and embarrassed to claim, only to be told they aren't deserving of help, will actually be assessed on their need, the need that they have now. It's not the grown man that he was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. It's the man he is today, the man who needs that care and mobility through his whole life. And when I look back, and this gentleman that I give the example at the beginning, he's worked for every 34 years of his life in a very physically demanding job. And whenever he needs help, he needs a social welfare system that does the job, delivers for them when they have a dire need, and the health changes in their personal life. So today's debate is so important, Madam Chair. It's a debate we need. We need to have an assessment that takes in the health conditions that they have, that understands with compassion why they need help, that the evidential base from their doctors, from their medical experts, from their wife, from their carers, from their mother-in-law, from their daughter. All that is the evidential base that we need, and I can't really for the life of me understand why it isn't taken on board.
The recent work of the Select Committee. Firstly, that these PIP assessments should routinely be recorded, because we know the assessments very often go wrong. We've heard lots of examples of that already. We don't know why. They should routinely be recorded with an opt-out available for the claimants who don't want a recording to be taken. All the providers agree with that proposal. For some reason, the government will not accept it. The minister's predecessor gave a number of reasons, all of which are valid, but they're all surmountable. By not recording the assessments, we just don't know what's going on, and the problems just carry on, and they're not going to be fixed. Secondly, about the amount of cash that's provided in PIP. PIP is designed to cover the extra costs arising from people's disabilities. Of course, the amounts will vary from one person to another, but the New Economics Foundation told the recent inquiry of the Select Committee on Benefit Levels that, on average, PIP covers only just over a third of the additional income a disabled person required to afford a decent standard of living. Now, I welcome that the government has committed in its Disability Action Plan last month to set up an extra cost task force to make an assessment of what those extra costs actually are. I wonder if the Minister in Winding Up can tell us when that task force will start its work. The practical proposition would be to increase the number of levels in PIP. There were more in DLA. It would be possible to increase the number of levels so that a better proxy for people's extra costs could be provided.
It's a pleasure to join this debate, and I pay tribute for securing this debate. Some really important points have been made by all of the speakers, though, as is often the case, the many different strands get mixed up with a confusion between the WCA, PIP, access to work support. And that's not a criticism, it is because it is a very complicated system. And before universal credit was rolled out, we would see typically £2.7 billion worth of benefits that people were entitled to, often some of the most vulnerable people in society, missing out because the system was far too complex, and you frankly needed a nuclear physics degree to be able to get that. There was around about 700,000 families who were missing out on the support that we all agreed they should be getting. And I recognise there are real challenges, and that's why this debate is important. That is why the Minister is here today and was also at the Select Committee this morning, a busy day. But I do welcome the fact that in real terms we've increased the support to people with disabilities and long-term health conditions by £11.3 billion, that we must not lose sight of the fact that both PIP and WCA, which we're talking about predominantly today, were both introduced by the former Labour government. And I want to pay tribute to all of the stakeholders, the independent reviews that have taken place to deliver hundreds and hundreds of improvements that have made a difference, but there is still a considerable way to go. But we've seen under the old system, just 16% of claimants got the highest level of support. It was 32% a couple of years ago, and I imagine that has continued to increase. On mental health in particular, you're now 6 times more likely in PIP to get the highest level of support than you were under DLA, where that was often recognised in the system, and we can all celebrate record disability employment. But to make improvements, I have a few asks or updates that I would like from the Minister. First of all, and it's my apologies, I did at oral questions, I asked a question, but I don't think I was very clear because I got a different answer back. I keep asking around about when somebody has been assessed for PIP, they get a level of financial support, so we can debate whether that's enough or not. But we do nothing else. So if we identify somebody who has a primary health condition, we never signpost them to the local support, whether that's formal or informal in their local area. We all know in our constituencies of different groups that support people, but often those that would benefit from that most are unaware of that. Secondly, has there been any progress around management reconsiderations? We did a pilot where we proactively reached out to the claimants, asked in their own words why they were challenging the decision, which more often than not was because they were unable to get the supportive evidence from their GP or whoever, and then we would assist in securing that. Has that progressed? Is it still double? Is it higher? Because that was certainly an area we thought would make a significant difference. COVID fast-tracked our use of telephone and video assessments. We were looking at piloting and testing them and introducing them over a decade. We had to introduce them over days. And stakeholders warmly welcomed them, and it allowed people not to have to necessarily travel to long distances to, in some cases, inappropriate assessment centres. But the other advantage is that because you were no longer tied to a geographical location, that you could, in theory, have your assessment with somebody with a specialist knowledge of your primary condition. Is that what is happening? And are stakeholders involved in the training and updating of the skill sets for those specialists who would recognise those? I was delighted that finally, and it nearly broke me when I was the Minister, that we got the Special Rules for Terminal Illness over the line. Is there an update on how that is working by matching the definitions under the NHS, from taking it from 6 months to 1 year, so we remove the double assessments that was happening? And is there any progress with convincing Scotland that whilst they like to be different, often for the sake of being different, in this area, they really should have mirrored what was our view, which was the one that was shaped by the stakeholders? And finally, for vulnerable claimants, and I pay tribute to the work of the Honourable Member for Oldham East, have we made any progress at the beginning of an application asking them to provide a named trusted colleague, so if they drop out or stop responding for whatever reason, we have a trusted point of contact so that we can say, the claimant is no longer responding, are you aware of an issue? Now, in most cases, that's because their circumstances have changed, but in the absolute worst cases, it would allow us to then be able to chase up support for them, rather than them being left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Latham. I want to congratulate my honourable friend from Slough for securing this crucially important debate. To boil this debate down to its essence, to boil down to the essence of the situation disabled people in our constituencies and across the country are facing, I think it can be summed up like this. Too often, disabled people are scapegoated. Too often, disabled people are treated like dirt. And disabled people aren't given, by the social security system, the financial support that they not only deserve, but they so fundamentally need. And that needs to change. Benefits are simply too low. The Select Committee, the Work and Pensions Select Committee, last week, as we've heard, published its report considering benefit levels for working age people and whether or not they're meeting the needs of claimants. And three things arising from that report that I think we need to look at very closely. Firstly, shortfalls in the support provided through health and disability benefits were found to have a negative physical and mental health impact on claimants, which in turn could actually affect their ability to work. Secondly, that the committee recommends that the DWP sets out a new benchmark for benefits, actually considering living costs. And thirdly, it suggests using the methodology in the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Trussell Trust's Essentials Guarantee. And these charities estimate that universal credit will fall short by £30 each week of the money needed to survive, even after benefits are increased in April. In relation to the situation facing disabled people in our country, in our society, we need to look very closely at the breaches of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because recently, during the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, on the 18th of March, the UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People accused, I'm afraid, the UK government of demonising disabled people and treating them as, to quote, undeserving citizens by preparing to fund tax cuts through slashing disability benefits. And I will give way.
He's making a very important point, Mrs. Latham, and I have an example, unfortunately, of a constituent of mine who until 2016 was in receipt of disability living allowance, was then told to apply for PIP, was rejected, then overturned at tribunal, then at review was increased her payment, and is now in 2024 told that she was never entitled to it and is being pursued by the Department of Work and Pensions for £49,000.
That's an excellent example of the appalling situation that disabled people are put into by the current system, and we all see it in our constituency surgeries, as the member so eloquently articulated there. 2 points from the United Nations. The United Nations Special Rapporteurs described current UK policy and practice as a pervasive framework and rhetoric that devalues disabled people's lives, which tells disabled people that they're undeserving citizens and makes people feel like criminals, particularly those who are trying to access the social security system. The committee members also cited examples of how the government had continued to breach its obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, pointing to a benefit system that traumatised claimants and led to some, as we've heard, even taking their own lives, increasing rates of institutionalisation and a disproportionate number of disabled people who are now too poor to eat their own homes or buy food. And a survey by the disability charity Ewan's Guide found that 50% of respondents were concerned about their energy bills, while 51% were worried about grocery bills in this, one of the richest countries on earth. The government reported in the autumn budget that there would be a consultation on an energy social tariff, yet this consultation was quietly shelved. This social tariff would have helped financially vulnerable consumers and those disabled people with higher energy use, so we need to go back to that. So I'll just finish on this, Mrs Latham. The way disabled people are treated in our country should shame us all. A real change in direction is needed, and what we must move completely against is what we see in much of the right-wing media, I'm afraid, which is a scapegoating and demonisation of disabled people. Disabled people deserve respect, they deserve support, they deserve a social security system that works for them, and we need to move forward in a way which is inclusive, empathetic, and supports everyone in our society, because after all, we're all equal. Thanks.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for the first time. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Slough for bringing forward this really, really important debate. The entire rationale for PIP and other disability benefits is to create parity between disabled people and their non-disabled counterparts. And we all know this just isn't the case. SENS have called on the UK Government to increase PIP so that it truly reflects the extra costs disabled people feel and face, and to increase universal credit, ESA, so that disabled people can actually get the minimum living standards able. The Honourable Member for Leeds East actually referenced social energy tariff, and I hope you'll support my private member's bill in that end, because I'm not giving up on that either. But in the UK, the UK government continues to shortchange disabled community, and the Honourable Member for Leeds East has already been reading my speech, I think, because I was going to use the same quotes from the UN rapporteur, but I won't for case of brevity. But it's shaming on the UK that the rapporteur thinks this is how disabled people are treated by this government. And throughout my casework and my engagement with disabled people and organisations, I hear that all the time. Disabled people feel disrespected, devalued and demonised by this government and the UK media, and it is utterly shameful. 1 in 5 people in the UK have a disability, and we could all be disabled tomorrow. I think that's a point worth remembering, and it's about time they get the recognition and support they deserve. We don't even have a disabilities minister. This argument has been raised many times, and I say to the Minister, this is no disrespect to her, but we do need a disabled minister focusing on this particular part of the portfolio. There's so little trust between the disabled community and the DWP, and with good reason. According to Z2K, since the introduction of PIP in 2013, 76% of claimants have ended up with a better outcome following an appeal, either by a lapse or an independent tribunal, and this compares to just 28% at mandatory reconsideration, where the DWP marked their own homework. This lack of trust with the DWP is why there's so much worry about the health and disability white paper proposals, and whilst the abolition of the work capability assessment is welcomed, it comes with grave risks. And it means that the much more high stakes for people, there's 500,000 people that are not well enough to work but aren't receiving PIP, and they're at risk losing out altogether. Therefore, it's imperative that the white paper proposals are halted until PIP can be trusted to reliably deliver the correct decisions. Since 2018, over 200,000 people have been awarded no PIP at the initial decision, but were then awarded some at the mandatory reconsideration or tribunal, with more than 70,000 of these cases subsequently receiving at least one higher or enhanced element. The system doesn't work. This is indicative of a system that isn't fit for purpose, forcing disabled people to endure gruelling assessments that have huge mental health impacts. It's about time the government started treating those with disabilities better. I had a constituent who was diagnosed with terminal cancer and was putting herself through gruelling trials. When she was reassessed for PIP, was more or less asked, "Oh, you're still alive. You're supposed to have died." The mental health impact on all disabled people undergoing this cannot be underestimated. And the Honourable Member and I'm so sorry, North Swindon, referenced the Scottish Government. That's why they started a system different from the one in Westminster, and it is based on fairness, dignity and respect. So they collect the information from doctors and others about the case for the individual who's claiming the adult disability payment. Isn't that a better way to do things? They have voiceability who help people fill in the forms correctly so that they get the right decision more often than not at the first point of contact. It really defies belief, and I've said this and I keep repeating it. Look at what's happening in Scotland. People who have worked for the Social Security Scotland, who have come from the DWP, actually say it's like night and day, the difference in how they have to treat clients, how they have to treat people, and how the system works. The Scottish Government have made a difference with interventions like the adult disability payment, child disability payment and carer support payment to ensure both disabled people and carers get all the financial support they are entitled to live with dignity. At my quarterly Poverty Action Network meetings, held the last one on Friday, there was a representative from the Scottish Social Security system there. They come every quarter and they're there to help local organisations who work in Motherwell and Wishaw to help improve lives for people. Will the Minister please look at what's happening in Scotland and reform this outdated, unworkable system?
To serve under your chairship, Mrs Latham. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Slough on securing this afternoon's debate. When he was a member of the Shadow Transport team, he joined me in meeting with disabled people to discuss accessibility, and I know that he continues to champion their rights in his constituency and beyond. He spoke passionately about the stories of people in tears from his constituency. And the Honourable Member for Newport West spoke of the challenges her constituent, Eleanor, faced when finding that her benefit was cut and then reinstated, and how this just caused multiple problems all the time. And my honourable friend for Oldham East and Saddleworth spoke about the consequences when an inhumane transfer from DLA to PIP, and how sadly Philippa Day took her own life because of this. As Shadow Minister for Disabled People, you won't be surprised to hear that PIP and other disability benefits are a regular feature of the conversations I have with disabled people, disabled people's organisations and charities. And I can assure you that even a brief mention of the word PIP assessment or work capability assessment is enough to strike genuine fear into the hearts of many. Disabled people tell me they feel demonised and humiliated by having to explain their conditions over and over again. And quite simply, as many have said, they do not trust the DWP to make the right decisions. And it's not difficult for me to see how we got to this point. Welfare reforms brought in during the coalition years, coupled with austerity, seem to have been based on the premise that disabled people are undeserving and out to defraud the system. And these moves, coupled with the fact that disabled people have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic and cost of living crisis, have led to a regression in disabled people's rights over the last 14 years. And that's not just my opinion, Chair. As the Honourable Member for Leeds so passionately put it, the UN agrees. I am ashamed to say that 8 years ago, the UK became the first country ever to have breached the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. And as already been quoted, Rosemary Case, the committee chair, said, "We find a pervasive framework and rhetoric that devalues disabled people and undermines their human dignity. Reforms within social welfare benefits are premised on a notion that disabled people are undeserving and skiving off and defrauding the system. And this has resulted in hate speech and hostility towards disabled people. Put simply, the current system is flawed. And it's little wonder then that we see so many desperate constituents in our advice surgeries who are afraid the DWP will take away their income. Quite frankly, we should all be ashamed. And the Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington asked the Minister to meet with the ME community to look at how we can reform the system. And I really hope that she remembers to respond to that point. I know that issues with the benefit system cannot be fixed overnight. But as the Honourable Member for East Ham said, yet again and again, I've heard him say this many times, why don't we just make sure that assessments are recorded as standard, a simple thing that can be done straight away? A future Labour government will provide a reliable safety net for people who lose their jobs or cannot work due to ill health or disability. Where appropriate, we will help people on their journey back into work by allowing them to try paid work without the need for reassessments if it does not work out. We will also replace the current system of work capability assessments with a system that supports people to live with dignity and security. In doing so, Labour will work with employers, trade unions and other stakeholders to support the well-being of workers and their long-term physical and mental health. Most importantly, Chair, a future Labour government is committed to working with disabled people to break down the barriers they face in everyday life. We know they are the experts by experience.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to close the debate today, and Mrs Latham, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank all honourable members for their invaluable and insightful contributions this afternoon, and in particular the honourable gentleman from Slough for bringing this timely debate. Collaboration remains vital as we address the critical matters that we've discussed today, essential for supporting many in our communities. And I appreciate people are passionate, but the perception of a punitive, divisive culture and the rhetoric this afternoon is something that in my time doing this job and in my commitment to doing this role, and my honourable friend there from North Swindon, it's not an approach that we have taken or would ever take. And I would want anybody watching this debate this afternoon to feel reassured that whether they come to us through a complaints procedure or into an MP surgery or working with one of the charities in this area, that people will get the support support that they need. And we at DWP, as much as anyone else, strive to give the most vulnerable the right support. We have the right policies and right system in place, that we can be fair to those in need, fair, of course, to the taxpayer, but always listening to disabled people's voices. And I've absolutely been striving to do that in this full-time role that I have here. I'm not going to disagree that I haven't looked at housing and youth alongside this as well, but much of this applies to disabled people as well. Those transitions and challenges are very much there to be seen. I'm very happy to meet with the honourable gentleman who he says needs to meet me from the ME community, so the right honourable gentleman for Hayes and Harlington, very happy to do that. I'm also keen to look at Monica's case. We've heard of other cases this afternoon, the honourable member from Ceredigion. Please do share these cases with me. It's no good you only having them in your constituency realm. It's really important that we look at these and learn from these in terms of DWP, so that we can get beyond that perception and feel that people do have, and that I am determined to make sure that I do work and listen with disabled people about their everyday lives. I was recently in Hastings. Just one moment, I'll just finish this point and then I'll let the Honourable Lady come in, around our new trauma-informed approach. I'll be at the new health model office in Gosport on Thursday, making sure that compassion, empathy and understanding is at the heart of what we do, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I'm grateful that she's offered for us all to be able to share all of our cases. I do hope the Minister realises how many, because some of us may be raising one or two cases in terms of examples, but I literally have hundreds and hundreds of cases in terms of where things have gone wrong.
Well, I'm very happy to look at these specific cases. I met with one of your Honourable Ladies' colleagues and with members from the blind community and people with visual impairment about how we can directly learn from their own experiences just recently. And the Honourable gentleman from North Swindon made exactly that point. Let me just, I've got a speech to make, but I do want to respond to some of the points. In terms of vulnerable people and vulnerable groups who are being, who need specific support, please look at this morning's Select Committee, where safeguarding, I think, was very much covered by myself and our Minister for Lords, and where we have a vulnerable claimant champion and safeguarding concerns are rightly referred to social services. My honourable friend from North Swindon, I'm happy to write to him on the end of life point. The appointees point that he made, we covered once again this morning, and in recognition of the work we need to do to make sure that people have the suitable voice that they need, and there is progress in this area. And we are growing our visiting officers team up to 700 as we speak, to go out and support people in the way that he described, about making sure we go to the people we need to hear from. In terms of the mandatory reconsideration trial, it's too early for definitive results, but a very pertinent reminder for me to be dialed into that. In regard to the Chairman of the Select Committee asking around audio recording, we've taken an approach of an opt-in of audio recording, so I'm happy to again go away and look at that specifically, which he has indeed raised. Yeah, please do.
For those, whenever it comes to medical evidence that's been presented, the Minister talked about compassion, but medical evidence is very clear what it says. Whenever the staff are looking at those matters and they see the medical evidence, can I ask very respectfully, are they trained to understand what that medical evidence is?
We've got a new Chief Medical Advisor and 4,000 clinicians in that area with statutory duty and understanding there, and that's very much some of the learnings that we've taken. So I hope that assures the honourable gentleman. If there's more to say, I will indeed write to him. But I think some questions have been raised about, you know, how is the evidence looked at, how is it worked, and that I'm asking that myself individually as well. So I'm happy to continue to do that. Of course.
I'm very grateful for picking up the point about default recording. Well, when she looks at that, I'm grateful to offer to do that, will she bear in mind that all the providers, all the companies who provide these assessments, favour default recording?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman, right honourable gentleman, makes a good point because they want to get it right and they're keen to do what's right. So I'm very happy to look at that and feed back to him my thoughts and pick that up in the department under my tenure. And I think the reality is, Mrs Latham, we of course aim to make the right decision as early as possible. We recognise the numbers are high. And by the very nature, anybody who comes to a constituency surgery as MPs has invariably had a very poor experience. They wouldn't be with us otherwise. So that's why I want to take away those particular cases that have been raised to me today. However, they must be seen in the context of overall decisions. I'll come to the honourable gentleman shortly. PIP 3 million decisions from October 2018 to September 2023. 8% appealed, 5% cleared at tribunal and 3% overturned. But I appreciate the honourable gentleman also made the point, and I'm very mindful of this. None of these are statistics. They are individual people with individual needs, and I think we should be very mindful of that. Happy to give way.
And given the time, I just wanted an answer to one of my various questions, which is that the government announced extra funding during the budget for processing disability claims. Can the Minister clarify exactly how this will be used to reduce the huge delays?
Yes, I'm keen to try and come on to that. There are many questions this afternoon. I'm trying to get to as many as I can. The Chance to Work guarantee was mentioned, which will effectively remove the work capability assessment for most claimants already assessed without work-related requirements, removing that fear of reassessment and giving the group the confidence to try work within the existing permitting work rules in employment support allowance and work allowance rules in universal credit. I'm absolutely delighted about what we've done around disability employment. I'm keen to say and do more around that, and I think that should feed in again to try to allay some of those concerns that's been raised this afternoon. The proportion of those in receipt of PIP with a mental health condition getting top rates is actually 6 times higher compared to DLA. PIP at 41% and DLA at 7%. And I would just like to point out the customer satisfaction of PIP customers was 77% in terms of satisfaction and different scores according to different providers, which again I'll go away and have a look at. So in terms of how people are dealt with dignity and satisfaction is extremely important to me. And indeed, I raised this morning, disability services complaints has decreased from 2,690 during the period 21-22 to 2,330 from 22 to 23. So I'm very mindful. Again, all of that is about experience of individuals. Let me quickly just try and canter through a couple of other questions before I close. The honourable gentleman from Slough, when he talked about PIP clearance times as well, we've increased our number of case managers, health professional assessment providers to deal with the increased demand and taken in the blend of phone, video, face-to-face to make sure it's more service user-centred and that it's suitable. We've also empowered case managers where they have robust evidence to make decisions on award reviews without referral to an assessment provider, so decisions are quicker and we can avoid claims going out of payment. I'm very much looking at that individually myself and currently end-to-end claim process for new claims from 26 weeks has been reduced from August 2021 to a current 15 weeks wait. So we're in a better position than we were prior to the pandemic. It's an achievement that I'm proud of. Is there more to do? Absolutely yes. But again, I want those watching and listening to see that this is a big focus. So, Madam Chairman, I just want to say we are fully committed on delivering on the issues that matter to the British people. This is delivering for disabled people. It's an absolute mission for me in this role to make sure our most vulnerable members of society lead decent, fulfilling lives, and I'll use my time in this role to make sure I can make the changes that everybody would wish to see.
The question is that this House has considered personal independence payment and other disability benefits. No, there's not time. There is no time.
He's 40
as
seconds.
Many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think nobody has it. Order, the sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding